Hi, my name is Jeremy, and on this channel I talk about color and light. Today I want to do another artist repaint. This one is from an amazing artist called Artemis. And he had this just beautiful witch's hut painting that you can see here that I loved. I thought it was really beautiful. And there's just so many neat elements. I really love little cottages and magic, and I just loved all the elements in this. So he graciously agreed to let me do a repaint of this to think through the color and light. So one of the things that I thought with this, I don't want to change the design, I don't want to change the perspective, I don't want to change what's in it or the positioning of anything that's in this. I'm just going to try a recolor. So looking at this to just redesign it, except one thing. One thing, I just thought that this window was kind of right on the edge of the composition. So what I decided to do was to frame it up a little bit wider. And you can see here, I just gave a little bit of extra room at the top and the sides and the bottom just to kind of reframe this. So the way I started with this is I drew a line drawing over top of the original and then hid the original. And this is my starting place of just painting on this layer, and this is my guide. So let's get in. Instead of showing you the full 4.5 hours of painting, I've sped this up at points up to 2,500% and at other points, 200 or 300% to be able to show you the whole process. So here we go. When painting something like this, I want to think about the light. I want to think about what would be a believable light source to this. And so as I started, I thought, okay, just gray light coming in from one window. Let's see if I can just get, leave everything kind of gray. It's a little bit of color in here. There's a little bit of red in this, but just think about one soft light source. What is my soft indirect light first? So light that's coming from the sky through that window, and just kind of looking for the shapes in here, the big compositional shapes. I also started to put in just a hair of color. I knew that the floor would be kind of brown reddish color, and that there would be some wood in there, and the walls would be a slightly different color. But in general, I like to start kind of gray with this whole thing and with just soft light. So I'm not worrying about the sunlight or the bounce light or any of the details. I'm just trying to paint in that one soft ambient light first. If you've seen any of my other training, I like to focus in on that. Adding a little fog here, put it on its own layer, put it into add mode, so that on that layer I can toggle it on and off, because I might want to paint underneath the fog and not necessarily always have that baked into that layer. So you'll notice I kind of turn it on and turn it off as I go along. And I'm starting really, really loose. This is a theme for me. I don't want to get lost in painting sharp little details of tiny objects. I want to know where they're going to be compositionally when doing a repaint, but I want to be able to focus in on the lighting of the whole scene. So I'm going really scribbly, really loose, just see if I can find those colors. The colors of the light bouncing off of this geometry. A little bit more light from the window, kind of outside. I also decided to blow out the window. Instead of seeing trees and everything out there, I wanted it to feel a little bit more believable. And in a dark space like this, the difference of the light would probably make it be too bright out there to see outside with almost any camera, maybe even with your eyes a little bit. So I'm going with a more photographic kind of response to this. It's pretty dark right now. There's not a lot of bounce light. It's just very soft. Here I'm painting in where the sunlight will be, and I'm considering the direct light of the sun through the window, as well as some bounce. So I'm making a new layer, putting it into add mode, and softly putting a brush. I want to see that secondary light. So the reason I started really soft and dark is that I want there to be just the soft ambient, but then I want to see the different components of light. I want to see direct light. Here's my sunbeams coming down to the floor, and then I want to see the bounce that's kind of coming up into the room. So go back to paint here. I had put those on different layers. So I've got my fog layer, my sunlight on the ground layer, my bounce from the ground layer, and my sunbeams, all as separate Photoshop layers as I'm painting, just so that I can keep kind of refining and building this in pieces. I can turn those back on and see how it looks, clean up, go back, keep adding scribbles, cleaning up those scribbles, pushing, pulling more. Here I took the line sketch and I took its opacity down a bit so that I can focus in on the composition, still just barely see where the elements are, and occasionally turn this layer on, sometimes leave it off, but this is kind of one of my processes. So I'm cleaning up here. I switched over to my mixer brush and then back to my paintbrush and to my mixer brush, and I'm trying to see all of the different components. It's still pretty dark, but I want to feel the bounce of the light. I'm not worrying about highlights or reflections at this point, shiny objects. I'm just trying to get in the main diffuse light, the direct light and the bounce light. Now I'm starting to paint in some of the elements, and you'll notice I'm popping back on the original painting to kind of like look and see, what did Artemis do originally? What color are objects? I'm not picking primary colors for these things too. If I see a green book on the shelf, it's not actually green. If you watch my other video on color relativity, you can see how it can make something look green within this environment, even though it's not really green. I'm just taking a local color that was from this area, selecting it, and then just kind of like shifting the hue with my color relativity trick just slightly, and it'll look green, it'll look red, it'll look blue. So this is a big deal for me, is the way that I find my local colors is to not think about them from the start. I will paint the light in and then use my color picker to find where the colors of the light that I established in this kind of gray environment, and then just kind of shift the color wheel towards green, and it'll look green. That pestle on the table looks like it's green, is really not. It's actually orange, just kind of a little bit desaturated. The greens of the herbs that are hanging from above the fireplace, those two are not necessarily all the way those strong colors. I don't have to pick yellows and oranges and greens. Notice the color, if you slow that down there, it's staying in this, this smaller range of colors, so that the whole room feels like the light is one set of light. And this process, again, is just slowing down. I'm 5 minutes in. I know I've sped this up, so there's 16 minutes. You can see here I'm starting to add highlights. This really starts, at this point, I have enough detail that I want to be able to start seeing surfaces. And the glass shiny surfaces, just adding a reflection of that open window, really helps it to start feel like, yeah, that's glass. Putting in the little light sources, the candles, and I was experimenting with the fire. What do I want to do with the fire? Do I want the fire on and maybe it's just glowing embers? I was experimenting. What things do I change? What things do I keep? Because light sources, the fireplace and the candles, play into this. What is believable light? If it was in the sunlight, would you see the light of the candles? And I think that's why I chose to put the sunlight to only hit a small spot on the floor, so that the candles have some space, have some darkness to kind of work together in this. I'm constantly kind of hopping around the whole image as I go as well. So I'm looking, if you notice, I have a smaller version of the window. I have 2 copies of this window, and it's a trick I like to do in Photoshop. You can do it in other software as well, I think. But this way I can look at that small thumbnail in the bottom right and see if my whole composition feels believable. Does the light feel believable? And then I can go to my larger screen and paint, finer details. I don't zoom in at this point. Well, there's 2 reasons I don't zoom in. One is that I want to focus on the whole image, and 2, because I'm recording this video, I want you to see how I'm hopping around the whole image the whole time. When I get to the end of this painting, I did kind of zoom in to clean up some details. But for now, I'm staying the whole picture, scribbles, little details. It's getting smaller and smaller, refinement of what I'm seeing. At first, it's just big blobs, and then, I start adding highlights and edges and the shapes of all of these objects and start cleaning up the lines. So here it's in the cleanup phase. I felt like there wasn't enough bounce onto the wall by the window. So I took a pass later and I'm brightening this up. I think there would be more bounce. I'm gonna let that bounce light spread a bit further from that spot of sunlight on the floor. And looking at the original here and always popping back and forth, like what feels right. So There's very little sunlight that hits directly, but there's a lot of bounce that fills the room. The two light sources, the soft from the sky that I painted first, and then the bounce light from the sun that I painted second. Painted onto the floor, some of the cross grid of the windows kind of coming in, so you can see the shadow of, softened it a little bit. And I just keep noticing things like the wall on the left is kind of smushy. There's a lot of black in it. It doesn't feel very believable. And I'm just kind of like always hopping around. I'm looking at the props that are on, off to the right. And then I'm looking back at the skull over there, and then this little thing up in the top. And now I'm getting into the rocks themselves. I just kind of worried about the bigger shape, and now I'm starting to paint in some bounce light on the undersides of those rocks. And I'm not even worrying about the individual colors of each of the rocks yet. I'm just trying to get in the shapes of where those rocks are. I'm starting on the fireplace. I'll eventually do to the wall on the right as well, and get the rocks that were in the original concept design. But I'm getting the big light sources first before I go back and paint in those little details. Because if I paint the details and I decide that my lighting isn't right, that I need more bounce, then I backed myself into a corner. So I don't want to back myself into any corners. I want to have freedom to adjust the whole composition of the light itself before I worry about little details. Okay, I'm employing a trick here. Instead of finding direct colors, I made a new adjustment layer and did a curves. What curves will do is I can just pull the reds up a little more, pull the blues a little more, pull the reds down. And so now I have a layer that I can paint on, like I'm doing right at this moment, where I'm just painting black and white as a mask onto an adjustment layer, and it allows me to just shift the hue from what is in the image slightly. So the stones, I can have red stones, and I can have kind of blue and green stones and more gray stones of different tones. But it's on its own layer, and I can adjust it afterwards. So I just kind of paint in the mask, and it just takes the colors that are already there and shifts them up or down, rather than me picking an orange for the stones and a green for the stones, that were in the original painting. It's kind of a different technique, and I find that this works really well. It just kind of shifts all of the hues slightly to give me that kind of control. All right, so we're 10 minutes in now. There's about 6 minutes left of this, and lots more refining. At this point, I really sped up this video. It's at 2500% speed, so you don't have to sit and watch me clean up little lines. But this is what I'm doing at this point. It's funny, the first 20 minutes of painting gives me 80% of the look of this whole thing. And then the next 3 hours is just cleaning up lines and little details, just getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And so that's the boring part. What I did with this recording, instead of recording myself talking the whole time, I put on some good music and I just recorded my screen. And then I'm coming back and speeding this up so you can see the process of this is how I paint. This is how I think. I want to think about the light and not necessarily about the objects. I want to see that soft light through the whole thing. I want to make another video soon about the idea of static versus dynamic light. And just as a little preview, I think the idea of static light is just very flat. In dynamic, you see the flow of energy through the different components of light. And so what I'm trying to do this is to make the light very dynamic. You've got light that comes in, hits the floor, bounces off the floor. You can see the bounce directly. And I think it's a fascinating topic of, really making something feel like it has dynamic or cinematic lighting. Okay, at this stage, I am cleaning up. And so here I have done away with my secondary little thumbnail, and I'm just zooming in and I'm just cleaning up the lines. I'm not gonna make this illustration perfect. Artemis did a beautiful job of every little line is perfectly clean with the illustration that he did. And for me, I want to get the essence of this, but I'm not going to spend, this is where the time comes in. I could spend another 4 or 5 hours cleaning up everything and making everything perfect at high resolution. But for this painting, I think I'm going to leave it a little bit loose. I mean, I'm cleaning up the lines so that there's not big brushy smudges, but I'm still letting there be some of that brush texture in this and leaving it a little bit soft. But so at this stage, I'm just kind of cleaning up and I'm looking at the whole thing. There is a moment here where I decide maybe his original was much more warm. So I've slowed this down. I'm showing you, I'm taking curves, I'm increasing the green, and then I'm going to increase the red so that the whole room feels a little bit brighter. I was feeling like overall my painting was just very red and purple. And his original had it being this just warm sunlight, happy place. So I'm making a curves adjustment layer and adjusting these curves to just kind of take the whole room up a bit and to shift away from the purples and to just kind of desaturate this whole thing just slightly so it doesn't feel overly saturated. It feels kind of like a believable medieval hut. So you can see here's the difference of the old purple version. I think I like this new version better. I think it's a little closer to Artemis's original design, but with light that is a different approach, you know, a different look to the light. So continuing to refine details, I realized that when I did that shift that this bookshelf didn't look right anymore. It turned gray. So I did another adjustment layer and I'm painting in that color and just shifting it a little bit more towards those reds and warms. And you know, it'll feel more like the original color, like it's a deep saturated kind of wood type color. And here I'm painting in little shadows, making some of the stones a little bit darker. It's final details now, right down to the end, the last little bit that I finished painting right before recording this video. And just like those little details, you know, do I see little cracks in the wall? Is there any lines that I can clean up? Any of the props, you know, that are on the shelves? And just like I was noticing in the original that Artemis had put in different colors of fluids into those little bottles on the shelf. So I come in here and I, you know, man, I'm just hopping all around. A little more bounce light here, a little bit more light on those flowers, a little bit more contrast and detail here and here and here, and just what do I see around this whole image? A little bit more specular highlights on that mortar and pestle there, and maybe a little bit darker shadows around the window frames and up in the ceiling. And I'm just like trying to look at the whole image and see, is there anything that doesn't feel right to me? Is there something that needs more contrast, less contrast, more highlights, more bounce? Can something be brighter, darker, cleaner? You know, where's the contrast in this whole thing? Little words that he had on these boxes on the shelves, and you know, just any little details where like I think it could be better. This is that refinement stage that just takes a lot of time. It's funny, in movie making we find that that last 10% is 90% of the cost, you know, just because we can get it so quickly to looking pretty good, but those final details, move this little highlight, move this thing here, add a little bounce here, remove a little bit here, push and pull for the composition is where most of the time and the energy gets spent, which I think is kind of funny. Alrighty, so that is the recording here. Now let's go back to the painting itself. So here is the Artemis's original. And let me make this layer black again. So Artemis's original, and then the new repaint. Neither is right or wrong. I showed this to some people and they're like, I like the original version better. There's more color, it's more interesting. This is just a different way to see it. So Artemis, thank you again for letting me do this repaint to talk about my processes of adding light into an image. This was a lot of fun to do. And again, it's just a different approach to the way you might consider painting. I hope this is helpful. This has been a lot of fun. Everybody keep creating. Until next time.